And so the level of Hungarian collusion with Russia was vastly underestimated.
Mhm.
And so we don't know if it's actual Russian money that was coming into Hungary, but there was definitely a situation where Hungary filled the same role as Russia did in terms of bankrolling the anti-gender and the far-right movement in Europe.
Do you know that we have clear evidence that gender equality, women's rights, and sexual and reproductive health and rights are now being weaponized by the far right across Europe and globally to undermine democracy and create social chaos? Neil Datta of the European Parliamentary Forum on Sexual and Reproductive Rights will tell us about it. Hello, I'm François Girard with the famous podcast, and I'm delighted to have Neil Datta as a return guest on the famous podcast. Neil is the executive director of the European Parliamentary Forum for Sexual and Reproductive Rights based in Brussels, and he founded EPF in 2004. That's 22 years ago, Neil. Wow. Ah, that's a real, real longevity. And you did this to bring together members of parliament from throughout Europe who are committed to protecting the sexual and reproductive rights of all people at home and overseas. And to do this, you provide these MPs with information, with advice, a network of solidarity, and other resources. And before that, you were at the International Planned Parenthood Federation European region, where you coordinated the parliamentary program. So this has been your great passion.
Yeah.
Under Neil's superb leadership, EPF has become the go to resource on far right attacks on sexual and reproductive rights, women's rights, and gender equality. Neil knows all about the actors, the funding sources, and the strategies, and he writes about this and publishes extremely useful reports. And I understand that the European Parliamentary Forum is going global soon. Uh,
Yes,
it
yes, we are.
is. It is. So that's very good news. So welcome, Neil. Welcome back.
Thank you, François. It's a pleasure to be back with you.
Yes, I'm really delighted. So, Neil, I wanted to talk to you today because I recently heard you speak about something I found really intriguing and important. It was the notion that gender and sexual and reproductive health and rights should be considered strategic security issues. And that came out of research commissioned by the UK government on far right extremist actors, notably groups created and supported by Russia. I mean, that was the initial brief. The UK wanted to better understand the strategies used by Russia to destabilize democracies and destabilize the West. And consortium of groups, sorry, I can't say that, carried out this research, and EPF was part of the consortium. And you found that these far right actors were, in fact, using gender, reproduction, family, as well as citizenship and migration issues to destabilize democracies. So they're using our issues, in part, what we call our issues, women's rights issues, to destabilize democracy. So let me start by playing the devil's advocate for a second. Of course, people can have different points of view regarding sexual and reproductive health and rights, abortion, gender. I might not agree with them, and neither would you, but I'd stand by their right to express those different points of view. How can we tell the difference between what we'd call normal conservatism and actual interference with democracies or a security risk? How can you tell the difference between the two?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Françoise. And that's an excellent question to start off with.
Mm,
I just want to start out just by emphasizing the point you made that contestation around gender, sexual reproductive health and rights, that is fully part of democratic processes.
right.
We don't necessarily have to like the positions of people who have different opinions, but we have to respect that they're part of our democracy, they're part of our communities, and in fact, the way that we have advanced has been through democratic means. We have had decisions from the courts, majorities in parliament, and that is how we have gradually built up the core of women's rights, LGBT rights, sexual reproductive health, gender equality. So
Mm,
it's fully part of that.
mm,
But at the same time, over the past few years, we've seen that there's been a notable shift in the level and scale of the anti-gender contestation, and also the range of actors has changed. And I think there we can see that it has strayed into something much more than norm contestation, and we can see that it is being used to either undermine or take over public institutions, and it is being used by foreign adversaries. So I think there we need to ask ourselves, is this slowly becoming something more than norm contestation? Is this something related to our national security?
mhm,
And you were right. The starting point was taking a look at what was happening from Russia, but then there's also other states or actors from other places that are involved. But if we take a look at Russia, it's way back 2010, 2012 that Russia, the Kremlin, had identified that traditional values would be part of the core pillar of its foreign policy.
mm,
So traditional values is embedded within Russian foreign policy as much as égalité, liberté, fraternité would be part of the French one.
mhm.
Okay.
What do they mean
So
by traditional values? What is that?
by traditional values, it means the heterosexual family,
Mm,
heteronormative relationships, and also certain limits as to the understanding of gender equality and sexual reproductive health and rights. Not so much they would not recognize necessarily the notion of rights, but perhaps health they would be okay with. And but really, it is emphasizing that the heterosexual family is the pillar of society and of the nation.
mm,
Okay.
mm,
And so from that heterosexual family, you then have patriarchal relationships within the family and within society. And then from that, there's a whole range of different norms that are related to it, such as not recognizing gender-based violence as a crime, also not recognizing sexual diversity, and also that women's reproduction can be subjugated to the needs of either the husband, the father, the nation, etc.
mhm.
So uh, there's many ancillaries that we need to consider.
Yeah, many implications of that. If straight men and presumably straight white Russian men are on top, that has a lot of implications for women's rights, women's reproduction, also migration, racial
And
diversity. Yeah.
I think perhaps the best way to visualize it would be a Russian version of the 1950s according to Hollywood.
Hmm.
Think of the series Mad Men,
Yeah.
okay?
Yeah.
But a Russian version of that,
Yeah.
okay? This is what for them society would be like.
Yeah. Now, the research was commissioned about Russia by the United Kingdom government. They had reasons to believe Russia was interfering in their politics and their social cohesion pretty dramatically, having experienced Brexit in 2000. When was that? 2014. When was Brexit? The vote.
The referendum was 2016, and then
2016. Yes.
it became effective just, I think, 2021,
Yeah.
22.
Yes, and they realized ex post facto that Russia had a lot to do with it. But you found in your research other countries that were also in the mix. How involved was the United States in interfering in UK
Yeah. So we
politics?
found some other countries. So there's definitely a Russian link, and we can go into that in more detail if you'd like. And in fact, there's a very
Yeah.
interesting example that has broken the news today about Russia using gender to destabilize public institutions. Other countries were Hungary, and then also the United States.
Hmm.
From the United States, it's mainly at the moment private actors such as NGOs, think tanks, etc. But these private actors all have very good access to the White House and the Trump administration. And so therefore there's a question insofar so much of state function in the current Trump administration has been outsourced to either the family or trusted individuals from the private sphere, then even if they are private actors, to what extent does it reflect, if not the United States, at least the Trump administration or a certain faction close to the Trump administration's desire to see things evolve in different parts of the world?
Hmm. And these are very conservative organizations in the US, right? Religious
In the,
organizations. Who are the main
yeah.
players here?
In the United States, the ones working against gender equality, sexual reproductive health and rights would be coming from what's known as the U.S. Christian right.
Hmm.
Okay. So these may be evangelicals, Protestants, Catholics, etc. And they would be primarily think tanks. Think of the Heritage Foundation.
Yeah.
Also, some legal organizations. Think of Alliance Defending Freedom International, the American Center for Law and Justice. Some NGOs. Think of Family Watch International, Family Research Council, and or CFAM as well. So think of all of these different groups who all may play a different role in their own niche area of specialty.
Hmm.
Some of the ones are particularly influential in Europe and internationally now, they would be the Heritage Foundation, which produce as a think tank, it produces ideas. Okay. And what's happened in the past couple of years in Europe has been the emergence of a whole ecosystem of far-right anti-gender think tanks, often related to either the far-right populist parties that we have in Europe
Hmm.
or the liberal governments that we have, mainly Hungary and Poland.
Hmm.
And they have formed partnerships amongst each other and with their partners across the Atlantic, among them the Heritage Foundation.
Hmm.
And then the next US export is really the litigation outfits, so the lawyer organizations from the US Christian right, and two of them specifically, Alliance Defending Freedom International. We need to remember they're known as a hate group in the United States for their positions on LGBT issues
Yeah.
and on sexual reproductive health and rights. They are the one. They are the organization that led the litigation which took down Roe versus Wade. So it's not just a rinky-dink little lawyers group that's very activist. It's a behemoth of Christian legal advocacy that is really working very hard to undermine sexual reproductive health and rights and rights related to sexual orientation.
Right, and quite effectively. Right now, they're leading another legal battle against the abortion pill in the United
Yeah.
States. Yeah, so
Mhm.
they're a main protagonist, uh,
Mhm.
and sadly effective. Now, how much funding is being going to these actors? What amounts are we talking about, and where is this money coming from? Because they obviously have quite a lot of money if they're able to do all this at the
Yeah.
European level. Mm.
Yeah. So we've been tracking the funding of the anti-gender, anti-rights movement in Europe. And so we have a database that goes back to 2009.
Yeah.
And if we take a look at how this funding has evolved since 2009, so this is funding for the anti-gender, anti-rights movement in Europe. And by Europe, I mean the geographic Europe. It includes the UK, Russia, etc., not just the EU. In 2009, we were at about $20 million a year. Okay. So $20 million a year for the whole continent, that's not very much. And
Mm.
that corresponds to the type of low-level norm contestation coming mainly from faith-based groups, religious communities, etc.
Mhm.
Okay.
Mhm.
So something on abortion or LGBT would be happening. They'd mount a protest. They may win, they may not, but that's what it was. 10 years forward in 2018, this had quadrupled to $80 million a year.
Mm.
Okay. This corresponds to the phase where we see that from little local groups that were rather amateurish, they had developed a professional infrastructure. So they knew how policy works. They were present at the EU, Council of Europe, United Nations. They had the beginnings of legal advocacy. They could launch different petitions, initiatives in different countries in a coordinated manner.
Yeah.
They had transnationalized and they had rejuvenated. So it was no longer a question of older white men. What we saw were many young women as well,
Mhm.
younger generation of militants and advocates. By 2022, that number had increased to $270 million
Whoa.
a year. Okay. So from 20 million to 270
Mm,
in the space of 15 years. So we're dealing with a fundamentally different animal than we were used to. And so that's why I think, the norm contestation that's part of democracy, it's still there. But when we take a look at what they have been able to develop over those 15 years, there's the religious contestation, there's the professionalized civil society contestation. Okay, fair enough. Okay. We're just as professional as the other side is. So they're simply using our tools, but now we have to get used to that. Then some other evolution started to happen. And then we saw that political parties started to become the epicenter of this movement, and not the Christian Democrats of the past. That they're still there in the norm
mm-hmm,
contestation, but we see that this anti-gender thinking is firmly embedded within the emerging far-right populist parties, and those have been doing very well everywhere in every European country. Um, and in some places, they were able to get into power.
mm-hmm,
The related to this is the knowledge production and dissemination. So we saw that this movement was really able to create a whole ecosystem of think tanks and also take over media in a certain number of countries and develop a head start in social media communication.
mm-hmm,
Okay, so produce the ideas and they have the infrastructure to deploy these ideas onto normal society. And then in some cases, they were able to access power. They won it in elections, so they were either the ruling party or they were part of the ruling majority. And from there, they're able to exercise actual anti-gender, anti-rights politics, and even geopolitics.
mm-hmm.
And this then becomes embedded within the wider process of de-democratization that we see happening. For example, it was happening in Poland. It just ended, hopefully, in Hungary, but they're not the only countries where this is happening.
Right. And by de-democratization, you mean, for example, taking over the courts to put in people who come with a very extreme far-right agenda,
Mhm.
anti-democratic agenda, taking over state media. I mean, there's, yeah, a number. The
Exactly.
playbook,
Yeah.
the playbook is pretty clear
Yeah.
now what you
Mm,
need to do to be able to take,
exactly.
yeah, undermine
Yeah.
democracy. Yeah, the
Yeah,
basic
and I think we need
institutions.
to see de-democratization as a process. It's not a big bang where from one day to the next a country ends up from being a democracy to something that's not democratic. It's more like this old saying, death by a thousand cuts. It's a
Mm,
little thing here, a little thing there. Many of them don't seem to be that important, but you add them all up, and you see that a number of countries have embarked upon a path towards de-democratization.
right.
And so in Poland and Hungary, we have a problem with the courts. The reason why abortion is virtually impossible in Poland at the moment is a decision of the Constitutional Tribunal.
Mm-hmm.
And that Constitutional Tribunal, we have to remember, was only in place because the far-right government had gotten rid of all the judges and then put in their own people, and then you start getting decisions that are amenable to the powers that be. And abortion is just one thing, but they have many other ideas that they want to see going through the courts.
Mhm. So what you're describing is like pushing this anti-gender, anti-sexual and reproductive rights agenda, and also attacking democracy itself. And the two kind of go together. You need those issues to get people to vote for you on the far right. And then once you have power, then you go much further. You do those things, attacking abortion, LGBT and all that. But then you actually take over the courts, take over media, prevent civil society from meeting freely, prevent them from receiving funding. You're like close the civic space, as we say.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and it's a very useful thing. I mean, we need to understand a few things. First, gender, sexual, reproductive health, and rights are contested issues, and that's fully normal. Okay,
Hmm.
that's part of
Hmm.
democracy. But that normal contestation is being used as a cover for an anti-democratic agenda.
Right.
So that when you try to call out what the erosion of democracy, they have plausible deniability, saying, "Well, I'm just arguing my free speech. I'm upholding Christian values, etc., etc."
Hmm.
Another aspect we need to consider is what scholars have described as gender being serving as a type of symbolic glue, so that groups and actors who may have very little in common and who may not like each other or share the same positions in many different respects will come together and work together because they have a shared antipathy towards certain gender issues.
Yeah.
This, when you understand this, that it's a normally contested issue, and you can use it to federate different disparate actors, it becomes a useful tool by different actors to use. And these actors can be those who have a genuine normative ambition, so they want to overturn abortion rights. They have a certain vision of society where abortion rights is not part of it. It also can be used by either internal or geopolitical foreign rivals in order to sow division within society or reach other aims, or simply it can be used to as a tool to build alliances with someone with another set of actors.
Right.
If we go back to the example of the Russian Federation, they're not that worried too much about the abortion situation in France or in other countries. But if they can make alliances with people because they share the same traditional values framework and then help them through their means to get access to power, then they will have a more friendly set of actors in decision-making positions that they can then deal with.
Geopolitically.
Exactly.
Yeah. So when we talk about the $270 million, right? It's dollars. Huh?
Mhm.
That comes from Russia. It comes from the
Yeah.
US. And where else does it come from?
Yeah, Europe itself. So,
Oh,
yeah. So if we take a look at the $270 million, and what the way we had broken it down was about 10 to 12% comes from the United States, really specialized in litigation. So you
mm,
have these Christian right private actors, but close to decision-making centers in the United States. Just think Alliance Defending Freedom,
right.
a former Alliance Defending Freedom staff is Mike Johnson, Speaker of the House. So when I say they have access to power, that's the level of power that they have.
Wow.
The American Center for Law and Justice, the head of that, Jay Sekulow, was the lawyer for President Trump in his first term during his first impeachment trial before the Senate. So this is the type of access that they have to the Trump administration.
Wow.
So they account for 10 to 12% of the spending for anti-gender activism in Europe.
Mm,
The next source is the Russian Federation, 20 to 25%. And that's really concentrated in far-right political parties.
mhm.
Now, if we take a look at the far-right political parties in Europe, just about all of them have shown some sympathy for Russia and Russian aims.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
they've had to temper this a little bit given the situation in Ukraine, but even then, they're very weak on supporting Ukraine. So they can sense what the public temperature is, and they adapt to that. Um, what's interesting is that with Russia, a lot of the money dried up after the sanctions were imposed in 2014 and in 2022.
Yeah.
But then, so we see less Russian money, but then appears a new source of funding from within the European Union, and that's Hungary.
Huh.
And now European money overall accounts for 60 to 70% of the anti-gender activism in Europe.
Mm,
So we cannot blame foreigners for being responsible for all of this. The Americans, the Russians certainly have a role to play, but this is largely a self-funded
mhm.
movement in Europe. And I think we'd find this in many different regions of the world if we were able to do the same analysis. But within Europe, Hungary, a small country, with the weakest economy in the European Union, has become the largest financial backer of the anti-gender movement. So there's something funny going on here.
Yes.
We know it's Hungarian money, and Hungarian money, a very specific type. It is money that comes from foundations, private foundations, which were taken over by people who are oligarchs close to the former Orban regime. So it has been basically the Orban clique that has been entrusted with state assets to take over private foundations and then operate them and then fund different issues which are then useful to the Orban government.
Mhm.
And so it's public-private at the same time. And I don't know if this made news outside Europe, but before the elections, which saw the defeat of Viktor Orban, the media had reported on a whole series of exchanges between Hungary and Russia, so that it turns out that the Hungarian foreign minister was engaging in direct talks with his Russian counterpart when he was sitting in European Union Council of Ministers meetings. And
Wow.
so this was revealed openly in the press. It's in BBC, TV5, etc. And so the level of Hungarian collusion with Russia was vastly underestimated.
Mhm.
And so we don't know if it's actual Russian money that was coming into Hungary, but there was definitely a situation where Hungary filled the same role as Russia did in terms of bankrolling the anti-gender and the far-right movement in Europe.
Mhm.
And in fact, in that report that we did that's been made public just recently, we show how Russia had a whole ecosystem to influence the far-right and the anti-gender movement in Europe. And that ecosystem, the scholars call it an influence factory, and
Mhm.
it was composed of NGOs, media, think tanks, transnational networks, all funded by private, outsourced to private philanthropies in Moscow. And then there was a separate arm that provided loans to far-right political parties. Think of the
Mhm.
Rassemblement National in
Mhm.
France.
Mhm. Mhm.
That ended. Then we come into the Hungarian phase, and when we take a look at the Hungarian ecosystem, we find exactly the same framework where Hungary is funding NGOs, think tanks, media, and transnational political platforms all together. And then separately, a Hungarian bank close to the Prime Minister Orban had financial dealings with four national political parties in Europe, which together made up over 50% of the third largest political group in the European Parliament, known as the Patriots for Europe.
Ah.
So basically, Hungary had bought itself the third largest political group in the European Parliament,
Mhm.
which is why helps explain how Hungarian-funded think tanks would come out with a report, okay, about, for example, they came out with a report about how the LGBT have taken over the EU institutions. They've come out with another report about how the EU is sexualizing children, so on and so forth. They were a report factory for a while. So they produce these reports. These reports are then discussed within transnational networks that Hungary is also funding via a separate arm. So like this, they socialize it within the political class.
Mhm.
Then they have their allies, which they're funding in the European Parliament, who take the content of the report and then transform them into fodder for parliamentary questions, resolutions, amendments during the EU's budget process known as the multi-annual financial framework.
Yeah.
And they were successful. They were able to get the European Parliament to create a scrutiny committee for funding to NGOs involved in environmental protection.
Wow. Wow. Yeah. So basically, whatever the apparatus that was in Russia before the sanctions was recreated in Hungary on
Exactly.
the mirror image, and then started funding chaos in the
Yeah.
European sphere through the political parties and the European
Yeah.
Parliament.
Exactly.
Wow.
I mean,
Wow.
it's a whole ecosystem of NGOs, think tanks, media, and transnational networks, and they all reinforce each other
Hmm.
and act as a giant echo chamber. But the thing is that people don't actually understand that these are all funded by the same actors.
Mhm.
or set of interrelated actors. And then the aim is to influence actual policies. And what were they trying to do? Starve civil society, media, academic freedom of any EU funding in the 7-year budget that we're currently discussing.
That's right. They like raise suspicions about their activities. Yeah, yeah,
Exactly.
yeah, yeah. And how does this relate I mean, there's several main themes that the far right has been raising in Europe, and a lot of them have to do with demography and
Yeah.
migration, and a lot of xenophobia has been stoked by them. How does this all relate? Can you
Yeah.
talk us
The-
through
yeah.
the themes?
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah. So demography has become one of the main issues for the far right in Europe, but also in many places.
in the
In North
U.S. Yeah.
America, yeah, in North America, also in Canada, I just read recently.
Yes,
And
sadly.
yeah, so, so what's the link between demography and gender? Okay, so for that we have to look at the ideological arc that they've built. Okay, so we start out with gender ideology. Gender ideology, let's remember, it is a construct by the Catholic Church to
Hmm.
explain why they lost on sexual reproductive health and rights, going all the way back to 94 in Cairo and Beijing in 1995.
Hmm.
Okay, a big victory for human rights, women's rights, was felt as a defeat by some actors, including the Catholic Church. So the way that they explain this defeat is that it was because of gender ideology,
Hmm.
this evil conspiracy composed of feminists, the gays, the secularists, you add in other people, and it was because of them.
Hmm.
Now, gender ideology is not an ideology, it simply describes everything wrong according to the Catholic Church.
Hmm.
And then from the Catholic Church, it was taken up by the Protestants, the Orthodox, and then by other sectors in society, the far right among them. But so, gender ideology for them, this includes contraception, abortion, divorce, LGBT, and a few other things. But what's the thing in common that, according to them, that abortion, contraception, and LGBT have? The thing in common is that it produces no babies. Okay?
Yeah.
No babies.
Yeah.
Okay, so remember that. So from no babies, we go into the next phase, which is what they call, and this comes from French far-right Catholic thinkers, what they call the demographic winter.
Mhm.
This is a situation where, because of gender ideology, Europe is no longer able to reproduce enough of its own people to look after its own social services or its own defense.
Mhm.
Okay. After that, after the demographic winter, comes the third phase, which is that of the Great Replacement. Faced with this absence of people, evil elites such as von der Leyen, Bill Gates, Gutierrez, you put in some other elites in there from global level, they are organizing the replacement of people by importing non-white, non-Christian, non-European migrants into Europe against the wishes of the original inhabitants of Europe.
Mhm.
And then this leads to the fourth phase, and there we have two choices. Okay. In the fourth phase, if we let this happen, then the inevitable consequence is what's called civilizational erasure.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Civilizational erasure, let's remember, we may laugh about it now, but it features in the US National Strategy document released in December 2025. Marco Rubio mentioned civilizational erasure about 10, 15 times when he was at the Munich Security Council. That's
Yes.
how high up it has gotten.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
In order to avoid civilizational erasure, then there's only one choice,
Hmm.
remigration.
Right.
And so this is
Send them
why,
back.
exactly, this is why there was a summit of far-right European politicians in Oporto, in Portugal, about 2 weeks ago to discuss remigration. You can Google it, Remigration Summit 2026. You'll
Oh,
have
wow.
the creme de la creme of all the far right in Europe. As a guest star, they had Greg Bovino, the ICE agent who dressed as a Nazi, deporting
In
people in the United
Minnesota.
States.
Yeah, yeah.
Exactly. And I was thinking, can the ICE deportations be considered a type of remigration light? Okay, so when I looked into this,
Of sure,
I
of
googled
course.
I googled it a little bit, and the answer was provided to me by the Department of Homeland Security itself, where they made a post on X, from the Department of Homeland Security with a single word called that said remigrate.
Wow.
So we have this being official policy now, in at least for a certain amount of time, by the current Trump administration. And so I think we need to see why it is that these far-right populist leaders, they're concerned about migration. They want to remigrate a number of people. But the point of origin for this is the dearth of birth.
Yeah. So
And
women's rights and women's freedoms,
exactly.
right? And it's also very much a white supremacist agenda in a lot of these countries, because these migrants are brown and black, and
Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah.
so it all comes
Mm,
together. Mm.
exactly. In Europe and in North America, it takes on a white supremacist agenda.
Hmm.
More so explicitly white in North America. In Europe, I would say it's more ethno-nationalist because they could be equally against some different populations who look just as white as you or I, but are
Hmm.
not considered as such.
Aha.
But it can be adopted by other societies. In India, under Modi, you can use exactly the same thing against the Muslims,
Right.
and you can be concerned about not having enough Hindus being born.
Hmm.
Uh, there have also been riots in South Africa where Black South Africans, are concerned about migrants from other parts of Africa.
That's right.
So it's an idea that's sufficiently malleable that you can take the core ideological arc, and then adapt it to your own local situation, which is what is the desired group, what is the undesired other, and then devise appropriate policies for that.
That's right. And this, of course, is related also to the online manosphere, right? I mean, the masculinist discourse that
Yeah.
says women need to go back to the kitchen and stop getting graduate degrees and have many children, get married early and have children. And women need to be submissive. And if they're not submissive, they need to be brought down, you know, through
Mhm.
violence in a lot of cases,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. Yeah. So
I
you
mean,
see the relationship there also.
yeah, with the manosphere, I think that's it's a separate ecosystem, a separate development, but that has been leveraged
Ah.
by anti-rights, anti-gender actors. So a lot of the manosphere is organically grown.
Mm.
Okay. And there's various reasons for that. I mean, one is that there's something happening with young guys and boys. Okay, so they have that. There's also the algorithms of the social media platforms which encourage engagement, including simply rage baiting.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so how much does it take an adolescent to say stupid things and then get threats to like it is not that difficult, especially when the algorithm is there to help you. So there is that. There's also the economic component of it, where it's an ecosystem for massive grift.
Mhm.
Okay. But at the same time, so this exists. But the fact that this exists means that people who have certain intentions can use it. And so the anti-gender actors have been using it. The far right have known how to use this. The far right, they were, for a long time, they did not have access to traditional media. So what did they do? They went to social media instead. It's just that now the tables have turned. Traditional media is suffering everywhere in the world, and what's booming is social media. They have a 5 to 7 year advantage compared to other actors in society.
Right.
So they're there as well. And then also foreign actors, they see what's happening. They're able to tap into this, amplify certain things that they think would be worthwhile, and then meet certain desired goals in this way.
Mhm.
So I think we need to see that the foreign component taps into pre-existing tensions in society, and leverages them for meeting certain ends.
Mhm. Mhm.
With the manosphere as well, I think one important thing to consider is yes, women are the target of much of the manosphere, but I think we also need to see the place of young men, of boys and young men there, so that they're on the one hand the agents of what's happening. They are also the targets because the young boys, the men, producing manosphere content, their target audience are other young men.
Right.
Okay, so
Yeah.
they're the targets, but then also they're equally the victims of this because they get radicalized in a manner which, they don't realize what's happening to them.
Mm-hmm.
Many of them simply want to meet girls, but they're
Mm-hmm.
brought down this path where they will never meet them, and it contributes to polarization in society.
Mm-hmm.
And not to mention, they are the primary targets for massive grifts and scams.
Yes.
So you can different types of pills and supplements and
Courses and yeah.
yeah, courses and very dodgy pseudo medical treatments to so I think we need to see that the complexity of boys and young men within that ecosystem, as well as what, the fact that, women, girls are the primary victims of that.
That's right. That's right. Now, one of the issues that's been weaponized is the question of religious freedom. I mean, that's
Yeah.
increasingly deployed by the far right in the US to justify discrimination and attacks on LGBTQ plus people, on sexual and reproductive health and rights, on Muslims, on women. I mean, and I'm not against religious freedom, I mean, clearly, but it's now become weaponized in a way that I have to, whenever I see religious freedom, I have to say, wait a minute, which is really
Yeah.
the way in which they've perverted some of these concepts is unbelievable. And I mean, under the first Trump administration, you remember the Commission on Inalienable Rights that was led by Mike Pompeo, a whole commission that sought to elevate religious freedom above all other civil rights in the US Bill of Rights. I mean, they've been on this for a while. Is this happening in Europe as well? Has this issue of religious freedom taken flight?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, the issue of religious freedom is being used as an entry point to dismantle a number of different norms, although it takes perhaps a European specificity. We have we have here a very clear case where the idea of religious freedom and the related freedom of speech, they're sometimes used
Hmm.
interchangeably,
Hmm.
is being used as an entry point to attack the EU's legislation on digital regulation.
Really?
And and so we have a multi-level coordinated campaign by some of the main actors in anti-gender activism who've discovered that now they want to defend freedom of speech, freedom of religion on behalf of the tech oligarchs. Okay. Now, the way this is happening, we start with a tweet, an ex post in Finland by a member of parliament from the Christian Democratic Party. She made a tweet that was deemed homophobic. She faced prosecution by public authorities in Finland for hate speech. So
Right.
that was ongoing on up until early this year. Okay, so we have that. Then separately in Washington, the U.S. House of Representatives, the Judiciary Committee, invites her and Alliance Defending Freedom, who are serving as this MP's lawyer, to testify before a hearing about how the hearing is entitled How Europe Threatens Americans' Free Speech.
Wow.
And the example that they provide is the European Union's Digital Services Act. And that because of the Digital Services Act, the DSA, then this promotes widespread censorship. No one is allowed to say anything in Europe, etc., and facing prosecution.
Mm.
Um, at a previous edition of the same hearing, the other person that they had testified was Nigel Farage from the United Kingdom. And as we know, this poor man has such a hard time getting access to public speaking time.
Yeah, he has no platform.
Exactly. This hearing results in a 300 to 400 page report from the US House of Representatives.
Wow.
That's as of February of this year. This report then is welcomed by a Hungarian-funded think tank called MCC,
Hmm.
MCC Brussels, Matthias Corvinus College. And basically, their message is, aha, we knew that the EU DSA, Digital Services Act, was promoting censorship. Examples of censorship were the EU deploying the democracy shield for the Moldovan elections and the Romanian elections, which were both subject to massive Russian disinformation efforts.
Right.
So the DSA was the cause for this type of censorship,
Mm-hmm.
and we will therefore launch our own election monitoring mission. And so they sent election observers to Hungary. These had 80 election observers accredited in the Hungarian elections of last April,
Yeah.
just now. Just myself taking a look at some of these election observers, they come mainly from the anti-gender movement. So Catholic organization this, anti-gender organization like that, etc. And then separately, you have Alliance Defending Freedom. Let's remember, they were supporting this Finnish MP in her
Mm-hmm.
litigation in Finland. They testified before the US House Judiciary Committee. They're also supporting X in their lawsuit against the European Commission because X received a fine of 120 million euros for breach of the DSA.
Right.
We have here a multifaceted attempt taking place in Finland, EU, with support from Hungary, and the United States, all wanting to allow Russian disinformation into our elections and with the aim of dismantling digital regulation. Now, why do they want this? Because a number of the anti-gender far right, they want to be allowed to engage in polarization, radicalization,
Mm-hmm.
scams, etc. The tech oligarchs, X, what are they getting? They're getting very good legal capacity from the US Christian right. And if they're successful, then with this deregulation, they can monetize, they can engage in polarization, etc. Let's remember Elon Musk openly supported a number of far-right political parties in Europe, including Nigel Farage, the Reform Party,
Yeah.
and the quasi-Nazis of Alternative for Deutschland in Germany.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So basically, combating any effort to contain online hatred and interference in elections using the religious freedom and freedom of speech
Exactly.
and all that, and then working hand in hand with the tech bros, who have a
Exactly. Yeah.
lot of money to pour into this. It's an
Exactly.
onslaught. It's an actual onslaught. I mean, that's
Yeah.
very
And so
difficult to
this
fight back.
exactly. So the idea of taking this from the perspective of religious freedom and freedom of speech gives it a values uh, connotation,
Yeah.
whereas in real, this is a deregulation agenda. So they, by attacking this from the perspective of religious freedom or freedom of speech, it gives a nice values veneer to
Yeah.
what is essentially a deregulation
that-
economic profit agenda
that's
on the
right.
one hand for the tech oligarchs, and then separately an agenda that allows for hate, disinformation, misleading health claims such as natural family planning or fake gay conversion, whatever,
Yeah.
for the anti-gender actors and the far right. So they all see benefit from it from different angles, but they need something nice and to act as a smokescreen.
Mm.
And this is where religious freedom comes in.
Mm-hmm.
But coming back to what you were saying earlier, religious freedom is a noble value in and of itself. We both believe in it as well as your listeners. But it is being misused by a certain set of actors, and they're doing this very strategically, deliberately. There's no confusion about what they're doing. It serves as a smokescreen for an anti-democratic and deregulation agenda.
That's right. And how does, we spoke a bit about Viktor Orban's recent defeat in Hungary, which is very welcome. How does this change this scenario? Have you already seen the impact of that defeat?
Well, we haven't seen it yet,
No.
okay, or we're beginning to see it,
Mm.
okay. Now, uh, the machinery around Prime Minister Orban was the main funder of anti-gender in Europe, but also it had a very much global footprint, so that a number of the transnational networks that brought all of these actors together were at least in part funded by Hungary.
Hmm.
Think of CPAC, the Conservative Political Action Committee. They had been meeting in Budapest for the last 4 or 5 years now.
Right.
That looks like it's going to end. The new Prime Minister, Peter Magyar, has said that he's going to stop public funding to CPAC
Mm.
Budapest.
Hmm.
Another one that looks like it was receiving Hungarian funding was Political Network for Values.
Hmm.
They last met in the European Parliament specifically to discuss free speech versus regulated speech. So this goes back to this deregulation agenda
Hmm.
that we were just talking about. So hopefully that will stop as well. There's been parliamentary questions in Chile, in the United States by a US member of Congress from California, and now in the European Parliament to ask about Hungarian funding, which may have altered politics in the European Union, perhaps in the United States and in Chile. Now, why Chile? Chile, because Hungary was funding the Political Network for Values. The president of the Political Network for Values is Antonio Cast, who was elected president of Chile.
Just recently. Yes. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Another activity that Hungary was funding was the National Conservatism Conference, a setting where none other than J.D. Vance was a speaker at, as well as a number of people from the hard right, far right political class from a number of European countries, including from the UK, conservative, now reform. They switched over to the further far right party, the Reform Party.
Hmm.
So so there's traces of Hungarian money that have gone to different events where a number of our leading politicians from 10, 20 countries around the world have all been involved. So there's questions there about what was that money meant for, what was it used for,
Hmm.
and it's appropriate that there should be democratic scrutiny taking place. And it looks like we have to lead it in Europe because a lot of Hungarian money originally comes from Europe, from the European Union, and some dark money may be coming from other sources, perhaps the Russian Federation elsewhere.
Right. So to be determined,
Yeah.
but
But
there's
already
indications that could open up some interesting lines of investigation.
there's a lot of work that needs to be done to dismantle this whole Hungarian financial apparatus.
Hmm.
But already we're starting to see promising signs. The European Parliament decided to deregister one Hungarian think tank based in Brussels, and that's MCC Brussels.
Really?
So, yes.
Wow.
And so this happened just this week. So already, so things are starting to happen. And as it can be expected, MCC Brussels is claiming foul that they're the victims of persecution and et cetera, et cetera. But
Crying. Yeah, yes. So in closing, what can we do to combat these actors and their narratives and protect our democracies? I mean, you're doing a lot of research and public speaking about it so people become aware, but what else would you like to see done to fight this?
yeah, I mean, I think the first thing is that we need to realize what the game is that we're being expected to play.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm.
Many people in our field still think this is about democratic noble norm contestation, and therefore they're focusing on arguments about abortion, gender, etc. That's not where the problem is, and I think many of us have good arguments on this on these issues. We're not inventing new things about abortion, sexual minorities, etc. Everything is known about these things,
Yeah.
more or less. But that's not where the problem is.
Hmm.
But that democratic contestation serves as a smokescreen for an anti-democratic agenda. And I think we need to look further. What is the anti-democratic agenda, and what are they trying to accomplish, and how?
Hmm.
So that, as we just discussed, religious freedom is used as a pretext for a deregulation agenda.
Hmm.
So now that we know this, we can act accordingly.
Hmm.
With the recent remigration summit and this discussion on migration and related to this demography is a certain understanding of gender, which is highly problematic. And so we need to understand this is a whole ideological arc that's being put forward. The most acceptable one at the moment, unfortunately, is the racist xenophobic one, because the anti-woman, anti-reproduction one won't work.
Mm.
But that's coming afterwards because the anti-immigration aspect of it doesn't make sense until you go back to the source of what the real problem is, and that is that women
Women.
are not making enough babies.
That's right. Yeah.
Remember the no babies
Yeah, we're going to
aspect.
get back to that soon with them.
Yeah,
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
exactly. So I think we need to understand what is actually being discussed, what is actually being at play, in order for us to mount effective defenses.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So speaking up, disseminating the research, really being clear about what's going on, and it's not
Yeah.
the vanilla, uh,
What?
conservatism. Yeah,
Yeah.
we can agree to disagree. Let's find common ground. No, because the attack is on democracy, human rights.
Yeah, I mean, with me, when I speak about this, I these are the examples I'm using now, and I'm deliberately choosing to speak to partners outside of the field of mainly gender equality, feminism, reproductive health,
Hmm.
because I know that regardless of how much gender equality, feminism, reproductive health were high on the agenda, we were never at the top.
No,
Okay.
no.
Um, there was always several layers above us. And those higher level layers tend to take a look at our issues as being, it's a nice thing to do when we have time and a bit of extra money.
Hmm.
And then it's always this women LGBT drama.
Hmm.
Okay.
Hmm. Hmm.
We need to break out of that cycle
Hmm.
and explain to them that this is really about undermining democratic norms, taking over institutions, deregulating some of the safeguards that make our democracy and our society safe.
That's right. And so that's
And
why it is a security issue. It has to
exactly,
be
yeah,
considered as a national security
yeah.
issue.
I
Yeah.
mean, yeah,
Yeah.
and I mean, and there's increasing evidence also that coming from others from other parts, for example, about Latvia voted to withdraw from the Istanbul Convention, which
On
is
violence against women. Yeah.
exactly, yeah. So it's a convention on violence against women. Usually that should not generate much public interest, but there was a huge public campaign about this, and the parliament voted to withdraw from the Istanbul Convention. Now we need to understand this is not, and this happened only last fall in 2025. This is not a discussion about is this convention good or bad or incomplete for gender-based violence. That's not at all about this. What's really at play is extracting the country of Latvia from the legal order of the Council of Europe, which
Hmm.
is our main human rights legal order, extracting it from that with this first step, and then bringing the country closer to a Russian sphere of influence.
Yes. Yes.
This is what they did with Georgia, or the country of Georgia, with the anti-LGBT laws. This is what they're doing in Central Asia and Kazakhstan with anti-LGBT laws. And just about 2 weeks ago in Accra in Ghana, a number of US Christian right organizations and African members of parliament gathered together to adopt the African Charter on Family, Sovereignty, and Values. This should be seen not as a declaration of sovereignty and family and values, but as a way, as a pretext to create tensions between African countries and their development partners and the multilateral institutions.
Hmm. Hmm.
Many of these African countries are signing highly unequal, if not exploitative, compacts with the US administration.
Right.
The idea of this African charter is that it should be ratified by national parliaments. So project ourselves in 2 years' time. Let's say of the 20 countries present in Accra 2 weeks ago, half of them actually do adopt or ratify this charter.
Hmm.
Then we would have a situation where the African values and sovereignty serves as a cover to legitimate US influence, which is highly extractive and exploitative. But they can say, well, we're working together on family and values, and it creates tension with the development partners, Global North, Canada, UK, European Union, etc.,
Yes.
and brings the African countries closer to the illiberal authoritarian countries.
That's right. And it
How does
undermines their own treaties on human rights, the Maputo
exactly?
Protocol on women's rights in Africa. I mean, the existing instruments that they have are now getting challenged by this competing framework.
Yeah.
Hmm. Hmm.
And this can be attractive to a number of leaders in Africa, but in other parts of the world, in Eastern Europe, in Western Europe as well, because there's always a group of people in every society that really wants these illiberal norms, okay, that
Mhm.
is against women's rights, etc.
Yeah.
So it taps into domestic demand. So you're able to give them something, and so it creates this aura of legitimacy. But
Mhm.
then it serves bigger geopolitical purposes that then undermine the very national sovereignty of the country. But it can be appealing to the leaders of those countries,
That's for
and I
sure.
think that's what we need to understand.
That's right. So that's why EPF is going global. You need to
Exactly.
deal with
Yeah.
all of this, right? It's happening on so many fronts that you can't just
Yeah.
stay within Europe, right? Is that it?
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's no, I mean we've made the decision to become a global organization. We've been working with fellow members of parliament from many parts of the world for quite a few years now, for almost 10 years. And we've decided to formalize it late last year. And so we're in the process of doing that this year. So we'll be inducting members of parliament from other parts of the world onto our executive committee. They're already fully integrated into a range of different activities that we do. For example, we just had a very nice delegation at the International Confederation of Midwives
Mm-hmm.
meeting in Lisbon just this week.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and um, and hopefully we'll be able to share the expertise that we have on sexual reproductive health and rights, but also on this anti-gender movement about and how it's no longer a national thing or even regional. It's a global
Global.
interconnected ecosystem, and the fact that things happen either in Canada, Belgium, Kenya is simply a question of the opportunities that present themselves at a certain time.
Yeah.
So
You have to connect all the dots, right? Yeah. Yeah.
exactly, yeah.
Yeah. So thank you for this, Neil. This
Mhm.
is sobering, fascinating. There's so many ways in which we can continue this conversation.
Yeah,
I really appreciate your time and
thank you.
your bravery for dealing with this. I'm sure it's not always easy. There are very powerful actors involved, and you have been at the forefront of unraveling this and really making it clear what we're
Mhm.
dealing with and why our democracies should be defended and gender equality and sexual and reproductive health and rights
Mhm.
upheld. Right? They all go
Yeah.
together. So thank you.
Mhm.
Thanks.
Thank you, and thank you very much for making space for this conversation.
A
So,
luta continua.
exactement.
À la prochaine. Thank you.
À la prochaine. Merci, hein.